Welcome to This Country Life. I'm your host, Brent Reeves. From coon hunting to trot lining and just general country living, I want you to stay a while as I share my experiences and life lessons. This Country Life is presented by Case Knives from the Store More Studio on MeatEater's podcast network, bringing you the best outdoor podcast the airways have to offer. All right, friends, grab a chair or drop that tailgate. I've got some stories to share. Will's turkey for today and my turkey for tomorrow. I got a couple recent stories from this turkey season. Both were successful in different ways. It is truly my favorite time of the year, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. So get easy. Let's get started. I hope y'all like turkey stories because we're still telling them and going to be telling them for a few more episodes. This first one is from Wilton Tim Reeves Jr. We call him Will or Wilbur, but he is my nephew and my brother Tim's youngest son, along with being his namesake and a reasonable facsimile of his father as well. Will and his wife Rachel live near the bustling metropolis of New Edinburgh, Arkansas, and have each called Cleveland County home since their birth. They've unleashed 3 young'uns of their own amongst the populace, and the world is a better place because of it. But this story is about Will's first turkey of the 2026 season. So in Wilbur's words and my voice, here we go. The first turkey I heard gobble was 3 days into the season. I called him up, but he wouldn't do what I needed, and I spooked him when I tried to move. 3 days after that, I pulled up to my normal listening spot on the 400 acres that I can hunt. With Billy Brent being my grandpa, we called him Papa, and my dad, Tim Reeves, I've been taught a lot about what to do and what not to do trying to work a gobbler. But this morning turned into something neither of them ever taught me how to deal with. I was where I needed to be, 100 yards from my Jeep, waiting on daylight when an owl hooted and a gobbler responded about 250 yards away in a patch of timber that had been select cut a couple of years ago. Now, the main skid trails were still open, but between them, it's thick with briars and brush. And I eased in as close as I could get, but it was getting too light to risk moving out and setting up a decoy, so I just sat on the edge of a skid trail. When it was light enough to start calling, I picked up my box that Papa made me, and I gave him 3 soft yelps. And before I finished that last yelp, 3 gobblers answered. 2 of them were way closer than that one I'd first set up on. Every time I clucked, they lit it up again. One of them even double gobbled. Last year, I called in 2 longbeards together, and I killed one without being seen, so I was fired up at the chance to do it with 3. I heard them fly down, and I figured they were coming straight to me. One was drumming in the road about 100 yards east, and I purred and I clucked, and they answered again, but they weren't getting any closer. So I shut up. Papa always told me 2 things. He said, Will, you call too much. And if a gobbler answers you, most time he'll come back and check that spot sooner or later. And after about 5 minutes, I heard something 3 feet behind me. I cut my eyes over, and there was a gobbler in full strut, looking for the hen that he couldn't find. I couldn't move, and I didn't move anything but my eyes. He eased over the hill west of me, and as soon as he was out of sight, I got on my knees and I faced that way, and I cut hard on my mouth call. All 3 answered again, about 100 yards away, with a jungle of brush between us. Then all 3 of them clucked at once and blew out of there in a panic. I never saw what spooked them, maybe a coyote or a bobcat, I don't know, but 2 flew east and 1 flew up into a pine tree. And I watched him strut on a limb about 75 yards away, beard just a-swinging and wondering if Papa's old 870 could reach that far. But I decided to wait him out and see what happened. I cut and yelped, and the 2 I couldn't see pitched back down toward me. Then, when they hit the ground, the gobbler I was watching flew down to them, and I called hard, and they answered, and then they went quiet. When I clucked again, I could tell they were still together, but now about 200 yards east in the road behind my deer stand. Papa always told me not to move much when turkeys are close, but these birds weren't budging. I decided to loop around and slip into one of my deer stand shooting lanes to get on the other side of them and see what I could see. I tied up my box call and I tucked it in the back of my vest and eased out onto the road. I clucked once on my mouth call to see where they were, and they answered, and they were in the same spot. Well, I cut the distance, and I made it to where I could see them when I peeked out around a bush about 100 yards away. All three were strutting in the road. I had to do something fast, so I just dropped to my knees, and I realized I couldn't get to Papa's call in time, but I had another call in the front pouch of my vest that my oldest son Thomas had given me for Father's Day. I yelped on it, and while I was peeking down the trail, I saw the closest gobbler break and run in my direction. The other two in hot pursuit, trying to catch him. I just set that call down. I shouldered Papa's shotgun. I clicked the safety off, and I waited. I watched as the first one came into range and pulled the trigger. Boom! He hit the ground like he'd been poured out of a bucket, and I ran to him and standing there with my foot on his neck and holding Papa's gun and having used a call that he made me. Man, I cried like a baby for about 5 minutes. Papa left this world on April the 2nd. I know he had a great reunion with Mamaw and my Uncle Joe. And it's not unusual for me to get emotional about killing a turkey, but this one was different. I'm sitting here writing this up and I'm crying again. I'm not sad he's not with us anymore because I know he's in a better place, but I miss him all the same. I've never known a greater Christian example, and he was a turkey killer most folks will never get close to matching. After the hunt, I was talking to my brother-in-law, and he told me, "Your papa was looking down on you smiling, big boy." And I told him I'm sure he was, but I bet he was also telling my Uncle Joe, "I've been telling that boy for years, he calls too much." And according to Will Reeves, who just happens to be one of my most favorite human-type people, that's just how that happened. Well, Wilbur, I've been telling these folks about your grandpa for the last several episodes. Lessons about patience and instances of integrity from just my experiences with him. You, son, are another example of it. Thank you for letting me share one of your stories. I love you, buddy. Well, if you listened last week, you know we squeaked out a win in the bottom of the ninth and had a turkey just more or less give himself up by walking headlong into gun range from literally out of nowhere. It makes for better television, as they say in the business, to cut it down to the wire. And what they're talking about is the story arc. And a story arc is the extended chronological structure of a narrative, mapping the rise and fall of emotion, tension, character development, and plot events from beginning to end. It acts as a framework to move a story from initial stability through the conflict and the climax to a new resolution, spanning individual scenes, chapters, or an entire series. Well, you know what? That sounds really cool and artistic, but it sucks. The struggle was real because I'd already missed a turkey, and the time to move on to the next project was getting close at hand. I wasn't thinking about art, but up until the moment I pulled the trigger on that Alabama gobbler, I was wishing I could have filled my tag on the first morning. To heck with a story arc. Check the killing box and then have plenty of time to shoot the rest of the story before leaving Reed Barganier's land. Instead, it played out in real time, full of tension and real drama, which was great, and they're right. It will make for better television, and the story arc is complete. Well, that portion of it anyway. We said our goodbyes, and Reed headed to the airport with cameraman Dave Gardner and all his plunder. I headed for the small community of Midway, Alabama, an hour and a half to the east, to meet up with my friend David McDaniels, where he was going to film a hunt with my new friend, Reed Duvall. Reed is the CFO for Turkeys for Tomorrow, a nonprofit dedicated to funding research for the betterment of the wild turkey. Reed had secured us a place to stay, permission to hunt on some well-managed turkey land, and introduced us to one of the landowners we'd be hunting with the afternoon we got there. Barry Kirkland met us at the cabin. Reed had described Barry as a turkey whisperer. That's a pretty lofty nickname for a fella. I would come to learn that moniker was more than appropriate. Miss Ella and Miss Jenny fixed our supper that night, and all the meals that followed like they were trying to kill me. The food was so good, I got mad when I got full. As good a grocers as I've ever managed to stuff in my noggin. Home cooking that made you feel at home. True Southern ladies that cooked and fussed over you like your grandma. They're part of the regular staff that take care of the hunters who stay at Racetrack Farms, a relatively new bird hunting concern owned by Roger Trawick and his son Brock. Now, if the bird hunting is anything close to the victuals those ladies are cranking out of that kitchen, folks would be hard-pressed to find a more suitable place to spend some time behind a pair of pointing dogs. 4:15 came early the next morning, and when the alarm sucker punched me in my ear hole, I woke up and I realized I hadn't moved an inch since I laid down. I was working on over a week of early mornings and late nights, and such is the struggle for a serial turkey hunter. But I was as ready as I'd been all week. The day before, we'd witnessed a turkey hunting miracle when that Roman gnome of a gobbler over in Fort Deposit chose poorly and followed his nose on a path straight into my deep freeze. I felt my luck was changing. I was hunting again with two dudes named Reed and David after hunting for a week with Reed and Dave. Probably even lesser odds of doing that with each of them holding the title of host and cameraman just as the other ones had. I had 2.5 days to get it done before I had to go home. And that should be just about right, because that's just about how long it took me to fill that tag an hour and a half west of where I was currently drinking my coffee. We drove down to Barry's place and geared up and walked the dirt road to where we were going to listen. We stood next to an old family grave that was protected by a wrought iron fence, just big enough to keep folks from stepping on a couple's final resting place that, judging from the condition of the tombstone, had been there for quite a while. I wish I had thought and checked the dates, but as the light grew bright enough to see, we heard a distant gobbler that required us to start making tracks in that direction. That day, I looked at everything but a turkey. We just couldn't seem to get close enough to one to even get something going. But I'll tell you what I did see, though. Quail. Bob white quail in every direction. It was a heartwarming symphony of nostalgia and reverence of a time when I could hear the same whistle on our farm when I was a child up until my early 20s. A sound that I had not taken for granted at any period during that time, but a sound I thought I'd never not hear until I didn't. So many factors that led to the quail's demise in southeast Arkansas that if I started naming them, I'd lose focus on the story I'm trying to tell you. The good news is, Barry, the turkey whisperer Kirkland, the Trawicks, and a great community of adjacent landowners all over that part of Alabama are all working hard to manage their lands with controlled burns and planting native grasses and creating ideal habitat for quail that, get this, is also conducive to improving those spaces for turkeys. They go hand in hand. I met so many people whose singular mission for their properties wasn't to kill quail or turkeys. That was secondary or even further down the list behind keeping those critters and all the others that benefited from their work on that piece of Alabama in perpetuity. The next day, we hit another piece of property suggested by one of Barry's friends. We couldn't find a turkey with a search warrant. We could hear them, but they were just too far to go after. About mid-morning, we loaded up and Barry said, "I know where we're going." A convoy of 2 trucks with Barry and I in the lead and David and Reed riding drag, and we zigged and zagged across Bullock County. And as we made our way to the next spot, Barry was busy telling me about his life and his family, his work, and his faith, and his service to others. Not in a boastful manner, just in passing conversation. I picked up the service to others part all on my own. I seem to find myself in the company of people like that more and more lately, and while I feel beyond blessed to be there, I'm not exactly sure how I got so lucky. Well, we parked on the side of the county road, well out of traffic, and started walking behind Barry as he led us at a brisk but silent pace through controlled burns that were vibrant with the green grass of spring, and slipped down mowed access trails between nesting cover and managed mosaic patches of thicker vegetation that provided necessary cover for quail and turkey and their poults to move about the landscape relatively safe from birds of prey. All along our route through the woods from the previous spot, and now here, Barry would call occasionally trying to strike a turkey, trying to get one to answer. That dude can call as good as anyone I've ever heard with anything. He can do more tricks with a mouth call than a monkey can in an acre of grapevines. And finally, we got close enough for one to hear him. We paused near the edge of a stand of pines that had been burned just before entering a hardwood bottom that held a shallow drain when Barry's calling reached down into a gobbler's belly and pulled out a gobble that caught us all by surprise and couldn't have been more than 250 yards away. Those reactions are always the same, a look of focused panic on everybody's faces and quiet resolve to find a suitable spot to sit. Barry whispered, "We need to find a spot to sit. They may be coming to us." And in the 30 to 45 seconds that ticked away as we looked for a spot to hide 4 people among a stand of charred pines no bigger than my forearm, Barry said, "Y'all listen." He then called again, and the response was immediate and alarmingly closer. The gobblers, yes, gobblers, because we could hear several gobbling together, were coming, and they were coming fast. I took the point with David behind me a few yards with the camera, and Reed was further back on my right, and Barry was even further, but directly behind me. He started soft calling with purrs and clucks, and in a few moments I could distinctly hear the drumming of a gobbler straight out in front of me, but out of sight in the hardwoods that lined that drain, the place we'd originally tried to make it to before the gobblers answered Barry's initial calls. I heard it several times, and then a gobble revealed that they were drifting to our left, moving around the small crest of a hill that sloped up from the hardwood drain into that pine plantation where we sat. They were moving to come around behind us, and this was no bueno, and made us scramble to reposition ourselves. I moved around the tree and faced the spot where David had just vacated, and he grabbed a spot next to Reed behind me. Barry, I guess, became invisible, grabbed a puff of wind, and materialized once more on the edge of the hardwood drain we'd been facing but now had at our backs. There it was again, and this time it was just over the crest of that little hill. I focused down between the barrels, past the beat of my 410 double, trying to conjure a glimpse of anything black that wasn't charred bark out of that patch of pines. My eyes darted back and forth without blinking, scouring every inch of space between those trees for movement or any resemblance of a turkey. And then, just like that, the drumming was gone, and so were they. We sat there for an appropriate amount of time waiting for them to gobble again, and when they did, they were a long ways from where we were sitting. They just simply moved on without any of us seeing so much as a feather. A big lunch prepared by Miss Ella, Miss Jenny, and a nap and an afternoon hunt rounded out our day. We called up a hen that hopped a log within a few yards of where we sat while quail whistled constantly in the fields above us. There's something beyond poetic about the gentleman's game bird, and while the gobble of an eastern wild turkey is more of a command than a sound, the polite whistle of a bobwhite is courteous and respectful. It evokes memories of old dogs and the scent of saddle leather and gun oil. sound befitting the icon of the Southern family farm. The next morning, David and I had it to ourselves. Work commitments required Barry and Reed to be elsewhere, so they were gracious enough to drop me a couple pins on Onyx to check out before we packed up and headed home. As daylight started glowing orange in the east, we were standing on a small rise next to a huge loblolly pine. I can't count the times I've been in this spot, not this particular spot, but in this circumstance. Wide awake, listening to the woods come alive as the stars start to fade. A heart full of wonder on what's about to happen. Am I going to be treated to only a beautiful springtime southern sunrise, a treat so many that live here are oblivious to, or will the bonus of a gobbling turkey be added to that symphony of sounds that grows with intensity with each tick of the clock? I start seeing the land more clearly as it becomes visible in the waning darkness. The silhouettes I thought were close saplings morphing into a larger tree line, still a brisk walk away. I planned in my head how to approach different directions should a turkey gobble early and give his location away. I looked all around me for a place to sit should one surprise us by gobbling close. I was writing the formula with each decision I would make for this hunt, and we would only know once it was over if my math was going to be correct. He was less than 300 yards to our north when he shook the woods into activity. David and I slipped over to a patch of hardwood, and he sat against a big red oak while I moved forward of him about 8 feet and settled in against another one. That turkey was gobbling often, and when fly down time came, I very conservatively clucked and cut a few times imitating a hen flying down. He answered immediately and pitched off the limb. For the next 3 hours, we did the dance. I'd call and he'd answer about 80% of the time, but never getting closer than 100 yards. I could see him at one point with my binos, bigger than life, and strutting at the edge of the power line. I'd call and he'd turn his fan toward me, but he never came any closer. He eventually drifted off to wherever silent turkeys go on hunts like that. In my mind, I imagine it looks like a hospital waiting room in labor and delivery from the 1950s. Coffee machines and ashtrays and cigarette smoke and chairs lining the wall and gobblers talking to each other, smoking while some read the paper and others pace back and forth and a few napping where they sat. And we stayed there in that spot until we absolutely had to load up and leave, and when we did, that stuck a fork in my Alabama turkey season for 2026. I learned something, several things actually, and it ended on a positive. Anytime I was trailing Waylon when I first got him, regardless of the circumstance, I tried to find a positive action to end on. Maybe it was just him coming to me when I called or load him up in the dog box on the first command. Anything that I could stop the lesson on that was good that would carry over into the next one by ending on a good note. I may not have killed the turkey with my new friends Barry and Reed, but there's the positive right there. 2 new friends. 2 new friends who I think about when I think about the meals that we shared, the experiences we shared, our shared love of all things wild, including turkeys and bobwhite quail. All of us realizing how much better both of those things are when you share the burden of working for them. The thank yous won't come from a social media post. They'll come every spring when you hear turkeys gobble and quail whistle. The invitation to come back next year and hear them again with them, well, that was the gravy on the biscuit. Good stuff. For the folks listening, did y'all know that you can now watch this podcast on MeatEater's YouTube podcast channel? Well, you can. We've got several of them on there now, and while the footage you see isn't a play-by-play of what I'm talking about, you can see the folks or places that I'm usually talking about. And it's a work in progress, and we've got some new ideas coming along as well, and I hope you'll check it out and let us know what you think. Thanks for listening to all of us here on the old Bear Grease channel. And until next week, when we get to put our boots on the necks of a couple old sneaky Pete gobblers, this is Brent Reeves signing off. Y'all be careful.